All right, we're talking LOD, leadership and organizational development. If you don't know what LOD is, I was selling it for like 3 months before I actually knew what it meant. I think I might have just shared that with you for the first time. I was doing all right, though, which is good to know.
Thank you.
Leadership's the L. It's leadership and organizational development. I have Brian with me and Nora from Advisa. If you want to learn more about them or any one of us, go to adviseusa.com. Who we are, you'll see a whole cast of characters and you can find us. But here we're talking about considerations for leadership and organizational development, which moves into training, culture change, all of these bigger themes happening within a business. And we're approaching this from the standpoint of coaches. If we're in and we're talking to somebody, and we'll call it BJ at this point in time, that I work in a company, mid-size, small company, large company, what are the things that I'm probably running into that Nora and Brian, and I'll contribute a few 2 cents on what might be useful to me when considering these different things. So we've tackled a few of these in some previous episodes, but I'm going to throw another one out that we run into pretty often. This should be a favorite. I like to call this one the T-ball, where I put the big T-ball and the T up there, and I give you a big bat, and I'm like,
drum roll.
Here you go, right? So we come in, we're talking about development. We're very serious about development here. However, our team went through a development session or an annual meeting, so we're good. We did development, so we got that done. So I'd love to hear you both react to this.
Congratulations, you're developed. Brian?
Well, yeah, I think the word that comes to my mind, and if those that know me use it frequently, is trainertainment. So I think my experience, at least with retreats, is usually it's like, well, we kind of expect to have to do some sort of development, or maybe there's even a budget that's usually used for that annual retreat. So it's just rinse and repeat. People expect to maybe, get 1 or 2 things out of it personally, but it's certainly not a leveraged investment. There's no strategic backdrop. It's not connected to their business strategy. It's more of trainertainment, and then everyone can go pick their activity in the afternoon, right? Golf, or you can go fishing, or we've seen this a couple times. So I think if I were to hear this from someone, I don't know, I think it would be more questions, right? Like, so tell me how that went. And I think usually people will kind of admit, like, well, it's kind of a one-off event, right? And it's not an experience. It's not a journey. It's episodic. And I don't know, maybe it's worth the money, but I might kind of push back a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I would want to know first and foremost, how do you see people behaving differently as a result of that one session, or do you at all? What changed about your team coming out of that session? And if the answer is, oh, nothing, we just had fun and we bonded and, we ate burgers at lunch and then we golfed, and then it probably wasn't a very effective development session. Yeah. I
like that. And I think too, it's there's 2 analogies I go to. One is like, okay, so you're just going to go to a rock concert. Like there's a place for rock concerts. Like if you want to go see a concert of a band you like, you're going to go. I mean, how many, when you look back on, like, man, that was life changing. I behaved differently ever since I heard, New Kids on the Block when I went to that concert. Like just changed my life. The
Please
right
tell me
stuff.
that's real.
All right, no.
Wow. No, keep going, DJ.
It's good. So if you're still listening, but it's like there's a place for it, and there's a trainertainment. There's a place for it. It's not like this is one of those nuanced things where it's not wrong. I mean, to get out of that fold, to blow off some steam, there's a place for it. Like you go to a concert. You're not looking for. It's not necessarily a productivity exercise where you're going to measure, is that concert investment still paying off for me like 6 months later? Maybe in hindsight, nostalgia, oh man, that was a great retreat. We got to be friends. I mean, there's some carryover, but it connects to the other analogy, which is I call fitness. Like, is your executive team fit? Did they become more fit? And when you think about fitness, you think about exercise, which is, I worked out with the whole leadership team for 3 days in January. And it's October. So what are your, how's that still paying off for you? I don't know. I know we were sore for like 2 weeks afterwards. And then what changed? Nothing. Because it was a misappropriated, you called something one thing, but it wasn't that thing. And so the ongoing, and when you want to do a retreat, what are you hoping to get out of it? You're hoping to get some organizational trainings. You're hoping to make decisions. And likely, I mean, I'd like to hear your comments on this. Some of those decisions would require consistent behavior change. And that's what usually gets downgraded, or just we don't put as much energy and effort into the fact that like change is hard, always. Changing at an organizational, even a small group of people, is way even harder. And the judgment of leadership of those teams is unfairly high, because I'm looking for every stinking reason to go back to the way it was. Sometimes even if it was worse. It's weird how we've seen this happen before. And so the stakes are really high. So is a 2-day or 3-day retreat going to be is it going to be a momentary thing that's going to create this wave? My answer would be highly unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, look, is there a place for it? Sure. I mean, if you have a brand new executive team coming together, right, or maybe there was a big merger and you had a combination of executives from each, I think there's a place to level set and get to know each other and do all those things, make some team agreements. But I think, when I think of this statement, it's not only those annual retreats, it's just one-off trainings in general, whether it's an executive, whether it's a new hire, whether it's whoever you're developing or who are you sending to training. I always use the analogy of like a rubber band, right? It's like you go to training, whoop, wah, right? A couple of weeks later.
Right.
And so if there's Nora mentioned transfer climate earlier. So if you go back to your quote, real job after a training or some sort of learning experience and you never hear about it again, my money is not on sustained behavior change.
Right. Well, Nora, I'd love to hear your take on this. So let's say the better question is what we commented earlier. Like, what do you want to get out on this? What would you propose? So I'm a senior leader. I'm like, all right. So the development, our retreat, if we just do it one time, I buy what you're telling me. It is. We could probably make better use of that time. What's the proposition? What would be a better alternative?
As opposed to just the one event, I'd say smaller drips. So it's sort of like you were saying where if you work out for 3 days straight, you're going to be really sore and then eventually you're just going to go back to who you were. But if you break that up into smaller chunks of time over time, then that supports your fitness. And so the same thing for learning development. We don't have to spend days on end together. We can just spend a few hours together every so often. But that allows us, by stretching it over time, that allows us to kind of check in and say, okay, so what did we talk about last time? How have you applied that? What did you run into? Let's talk about that. What changes or tweaks do we need to make along the way? And so it becomes a much more iterative process, but one that really lasts. And another thing that we do, I would say pretty well, is that we structure our learning in lots of different ways. And so there might be certain things that a person does independently, maybe some reading, maybe some reflection, some application activities, and then we come together and actually discuss those things together so that people can also learn from each other. But that only works over a long period of time. You can't just kind of sit in a room for one whole day and actually know how the things that we're going to be talking about are going to come to life for you. You've got to break out, practice it, and then come back.
So it sounds great. So I guess, where have you seen that fall apart? Because on paper, it's like, that makes more sense. Like, but when someone tries to do that, where would it fall apart?
In that transfer environment or lack thereof, I would say. If someone leaves that training room and goes back to a manager or a leader or an entire organization that's just like, okay, all well and good, you went to training, but now do the same thing that you've been doing this entire time. There's no reflection or even changed expectations for that person.
I like that transfer.
And I think, just to add to that, I think it's the executive team. And even more specific to that, it's the CEO or the president. Whoever the buck stops with. I think too often people development really has always just rested in the function of HR. in organizations, which I mean makes a lot of sense. I think where that becomes a challenge is in a lot of cases, HR doesn't necessarily have quite the seat at the table that they wish they would. I mean, it's kind of a enigma in that a lot of our businesses that we work with, they'll have some sort of business strategy, whether it's formal, informal, whatever. That strategy just doesn't happen. People do stuff. People have to do things.
Right.
Right? So, yeah, it's funny how that works. So I would encourage, if you're in that role, an HR role, I think you can certainly champion. What I might recommend, though, is get a business executive who's actually in that, whatever title that might be, chief revenue officer, CEO, someone that's actually in the business doing the work. Often there's more, credibility saying that this is important because everyone candidly expects the HR person to say that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I think it's well-intentioned and often it's sincere. It's just not as effective as if you were to have the CEO say the same things.
Right. And closing this out, like think about like a sports analogy. Yeah, the football team, we're gonna practice on 2 days in January, and then we're just gonna be ready for the games come March. And they just go work. You go over there and throw the ball a little bit, and you do that. Like, don't practice. Just play faux games. Essentially, with work, we do that. And if an athlete tried to do that, you'd be like, what's the matter with this fool? Mm-hmm. They're not even practicing. They're not drilling. They're not doing anything. And then where was the coach? The coach just literally left after the development day. There's no coach. Like when you talk about that business executive. Mm-hmm. And I'm here, I'm the offensive coordinator. All right, team, we want to be together. The defensive coordinator has their team over there at a separate room, and there's no coach. And I guess if anybody, you lay it down, I don't care what sport you follow, how much money are you putting on that team to win any games? Yeah, not very much. And the other thing I would put in there too, and this is one I use to equip the counterparts I work with in businesses, is I talk about sprint and 100-meter dash. Like especially when they talk about, we have such a talented team. We're so talented. I'm like, all right. So like you're like the Jamaican 4x100 team. Yeah. Okay, great. So you have that, and I have my son's 13-year-old friends, just randomly picked 4 people. You get to pick them. All right, great. Who are you gonna bet on? Well, the Jamaican sprinting team, right? 100%. Yeah, right. So let me talk to you. There's one caveat you haven't forgot. It's like how much waste do they have to run through? How much friction do they have to run through based upon your environment, the development, how many acceleration principles, and how many things are in place to slow them down? So when you talked about everything you told me earlier in this conversation, it sounds like your team's up to their nose in liquid. Mm-hmm. And based on what I shared, could be my 7th grade and 8th graders are running in an inch. Who are you betting on now? It just moots out the talent. Mm-hmm. Like I have all this great talent, whether they're disengaged, the leadership is disjointed, so there's backbiting, there's lack of communication. That's costing you seconds and maybe even minutes when you're running these races. Mm-hmm. And then we go back to one we talked about earlier. You can go check it out. Then you hear busy. Then everyone's super busy doing triple work, fixing other work, trying to make up for things, meeting with clients. Hey, we're so sorry we screwed up, blah, blah, blah. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, huh. And I just drill it right back to development. Well, what are you training to be? It sounds like you're not training and this is the result. And what if you train? How would it look different? Mm-hmm. We'd do work one time. We'd get together under one, to Brian's point with the business leader, we'd be under one banner where there's a consistent voice echoing in a rhythm throughout the year to guide our behavior, to aim the North Star. Because why? Stuff happens. We get busy. Vacations come. They go. Like people, the team shift, even if an engaged environment, you're still going to have turnover. Hate to break it to you. There's going to be moving parts that happen. And if we don't have that voice, I know that for us, that's really hurt us more than once, where it's like that the person carrying the banner goes away and there was no baton passing. There was no anything. And it was just like, all right, here we are with basically an impotent program. There's no, it's over. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're interested in thinking about or rethinking or re-envisioning what even a retreat can be, if this is a conversation you have, a budget line that you have, and you'd like to think about how maybe at your company you might want to revision something like this, and you want to speak with Nora, Brian, or myself, just go to adviseusa.com. The Drift app will come up in the corner. Just ping and say, hey, I'd like to talk to all 3 or one of these individuals about this organization. We could set up a meeting and have that conversation with you. Brian, Nora, thank you.
Thanks.